I have to admit, I have a little bit of a guilty pleasure. One of the things I really enjoy about driving a Mercedes is pretending that the hood ornament is like the crosshairs and I'm aiming. And there's something that we're going to talk about today that would definitely be in the crosshairs.
You're scaring me a little bit.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about, but that doesn't stop me from getting a little scared of you and your little Mercedes crosshairs.
There are definitely some people that should be scared because we're calling them out.
All right. I don't know.
You don't know.
I'm not really sure if I should call for help or if I should just kind of go with it.
There's a topic that probably many of those of you who listen won't personally seek this, but perhaps your significant others do. And that is to have jeweled watches or iced out watches. If it's all diamonds, then it's iced out.
Well, it doesn't have to be all diamonds.
Or to have lots of diamonds on your watches.
A diamond, like a Tiffany pattern.
Would a diamond qualify as iced out?
Yeah, man, if it's big enough.
Why we had to bring this up is because there's a lot of it that happens, and the vast majority, I would say very close to 100%, that happens in the aftermarket is extremely detrimental to the watch. And the vast majority of this that happens in the aftermarket, and to my experience, it has been 100%, although, of course, I can't guarantee that 100% of the time it's bad. 100% of the examples I've seen have been very detrimental to the watch. And that is adding diamonds aftermarket, whether it's to the bezel or to the case, or even I've seen the bad examples when it's just an aftermarket diamond dial.
What about the bracelet?
Oh yeah, that's just awful.
Awful or detrimental?
Both.
Well, yeah, I guess it's detrimental to class, but we're not talking about that right now, are we?
Well, also, we're talking about the structural integrity.
Right.
This is not to say that I have anything against jeweled watches. I happen to think they can be very pretty. I
Sure.
think they can be very classy. Even on a man's watch, I think just to have jewel hour markers, I can be okay with that.
Sure, like a Datejust with diamond dial. Okay, fine.
Meteorite.
I'll let that slide.
Meteorite with diamond hour markers, please.
Okay, I'll let that slide too, but it's not to my liking. But then again, that doesn't really say much.
Probably most of you listening are not the ones going down to the hack jobs and having them, drill through your watch and just add a bunch of garbage onto it. But what we are concerned about is that your significant others may be asking you for a jeweled watch of any brand. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that if you go buy one, especially if you go buy one that is secondhand, you don't know if that is a factory job or not. And if it's not a factory job, you very likely will have a ruined watch that you don't know yet is ruined.
Before we go on, let's talk about some positive things about iced out watches or just watches with diamonds on it.
They can be very pretty. But there is a way to be classy with
there
these
is
stones.
a way. You're absolutely right.
Most of them are not classy.
Yes. Well, we're not going to sit and discuss who's classy or not, but let's just put it this way. There's a right way and the wrong way to do diamonds, just like there's a right way and a wrong way to do a watch.
Wait, I thought this episode about who's classy and who wasn't.
You're talking about the wrong show. So you might want to see your way out of this door and then walk over however many
units.
Yeah. Let's move on. So iced out watches or watches with diamonds in general. The brands that do them in-house are most exactly. So you have everything from, let's say, a more affordable iced out watch or a more affordable diamond-studded watch like a Longines or a Baume & Mercier, all the way up to something like a Vacheron, a Patek, an Audemars Piguet. Audemars Piguet has a lot of iced out stuff.
Oh, they most certainly do.
And then obviously, there's the middle crap, which is like the Hublots.
Even Lange has jeweled watches now.
Right. So one of the main issues, I think, with people and original OEM diamond-studded watches is price. And I think that's one of the reasons why this market that we're going to discuss exists, because a factory diamond watch is going to be a lot more expensive than something that you will be able to buy on Hill Street, which is basically Los Angeles' diamond district.
Absolutely right, Mike. You might be thinking, well, why would this even exist? Why would there be this business of ruining watches? But the reason is because to obtain an original is oftentimes cost prohibitive, and so people look for a cheaper way to achieve that. But the problem is that what they're ending up with in the end is something that is far worse than that watch would be without the diamonds.
primary issue with aftermarket is there is most likely someone that's working on it that is not at the factory that knows every single detail of that particular case.
Right. So the case hasn't been made to accommodate a diamond. If you were making the watch from scratch as an OEM with the intention of putting a diamond on it, you would make the case thick enough, you would cast the case correctly, and you would build it from the beginning to accommodate these stones, no problem.
Sure.
The problem is if you take a watch that wasn't built like that, it was made to just have nothing, to have a polished outer or brushed outer surface with nothing mounted in it, you then have to make a hole in there. You have to drill a setting. And if the watch wasn't made to accommodate the setting, you end up drilling a hole and piercing the case, and it's all over.
Basically, you create a pathway for moisture and foreign debris to enter, even if that hole has been fitted with a diamond. It's not a perfect seal.
Oh yeah, set stones are not in any way a seal.
Especially when that case is supposed to be moisture-proof or waterproof.
Right.
To begin with in design.
Right. I guess maybe the common misconception in that is diamonds are hard. They're not water resistant or proof or something of that sort.
No.
Maybe if you were to have a case that is completely sealed, that is a diamond, that's a little bit different of a situation, but I doubt that something like that exists.
It does not.
Thank you.
It comes down to the structural integrity. Even if you don't pierce it, you're making it a lot thinner. Just think about what would happen if you have something that's supposed to be 3 millimeters thick. Even if you don't pierce it, you make a bunch of 2 millimeter divots and holes all over it. You're ending up with a very, very thin, basically a piece of like Swiss cheese. Even if the hole doesn't go all the way through,
Right.
there are a lot of holes.
Yeah. In other words, if you take a 2x4 and you drill a bunch of holes in it or a bunch of sub-holes that don't go 100% through, you are jeopardizing the structural capability of that 2x4. In motor racing, for example, you will have a roll cage, right? And within that roll cage, there are certain points that are drilled out. That's done for lightness, and that's
Right.
reinforced at a certain way that it does not jeopardize the structural rigidity of that roll cage. Watches are not roll cages.
Really? Holy crap. I need to go fix my race car. So other people say, well, what about the bezel?
What
That's
about the bezel?
Yeah, the bezel just attaches to it.
Right.
We'll leave the case alone.
Okay.
Just switch the bezel. Well, the bezel is actually an integral part of the seal of the case. If your bezel doesn't fit tightly, you don't have a water seal on your watch. It is an integral component, right?
Correct. Yeah. Take Rolex, for example. The bezel holds the crystal in place.
Like a collar around
Like
it.
a collar, yeah. So if the bezel itself hasn't been purposely made to be strong with enough quote-unquote meat or material, we see a variety of issues with them. Of course, there's different grades of bezel. So one is where they take the original bezel and they pierce holes in it. Well,
Always a bad idea.
That's a very bad idea.
Yeah.
So it
That's our
wasn't
2x4.
Yeah.
right. So it wasn't designed to have holes pierced in it because it's not thick enough to begin with. And so they jeopardize the structural strength. So like you said, the rigidity. So as that bezel is being fitted, it could crack, it could fissure, even just a small amount. And of course, their remedy is to, now to add glue or epoxy, which is one mistake after another.
Right. Yeah, which is always a great thing to do to your Rolex is put some glue on it. Get some super glue.
That's right.
So bad idea. But to answer your question, Chase, yeah, the bezel holds the crystal in place and holds it really nice and tight. It's supposed to. And once you compromise the integrity of the bezel, then, you're opening a big can of worms. And mostly we see moisture getting in the case sooner or later.
Right. And it doesn't matter if it's an automatic watch or a quartz watch.
Doesn't matter.
Moisture is the enemy.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, maybe back in the 1940s and 50s, some cases, not specifically Rolex or any brand, they were not water resistant or moisture proof to begin with. We had a lot of cases that were what's called dust proof. So there was no seal whatsoever on the case. And yeah, you had, like, especially ladies, diamond cocktail type of watches, what they call them, had diamonds in them. But still, even the fact that it was dust-proof, adding more holes in it didn't make things better.
I don't think, though, that even in those cases, they tried to minimize the number of complete perforations that would go through.
Correct.
So they would mount the stones, but there's still an understanding of the less openings in the case, the better.
Right.
Sure.
Going back to, water-resistant cases of more modern provenance, I think that this is extremely important to be aware of.
Since we brought up the example of Rolex, you have these aftermarket bezels that in many cases, they won't fit correctly. And so you'll see a lot of times there's a semicircle arc on the underside of the bezel that is ground away so that it will fit over the crown. Or the bezel won't even fit tight on the watch and it won't create a seal. Any number of things. Or even if it does seal when it's new, the fact that it's not a well-made piece of jewelry and not intended for the watch, it'll get premature metal fatigue because it's too thin or too soft or whatever, just because it's wrong.
Right.
And it will fatigue over time at a very high rate and lose the seal.
Also to remember that many of those aftermarket bezels, and I'm sure there's somebody who makes excellent quality aftermarket bezels with diamonds. I just don't know who they are. Neither do I engage in that type of activity. Mm-hmm. But most of what we see, they're actually cast bezels. Mm-hmm. And they are those that are machine made, that are spun out of high tensile gold or stainless steel. But most of the ones that we see, they're cast. They don't have good structural integrity.
No.
And plus they have a lot of openings to make it lighter, to to save on gold.
Content. Or if it's just not a good casting, you can have issues of porosity, which porosity literally means there are bubbles.
And when it's cast, it's not perfectly circular. So all kinds of hack jobs. One of the things I noticed that I don't know how long this practice has been ongoing for is the sellers of these iced out watches are planting them at estate sales.
Oh, that's been going on forever.
They're like, oh, this is an original and it's got all the diamonds on it and everything. And I said, where'd you get it from? Oh, it was at an estate sale. And we were told that it belonged to this old lady who, passed away and so on and so forth. They made it sound that it existed that way from 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. And what it really was it was a lady's Rolex watch, which dated from the 1960s or late 50s with an old automatic movement with a recently installed aftermarket diamond bezel, with a recently installed diamond marker dial, with an aftermarket two-tone bracelet, but they had swapped the original clasp from it. So they kind of made it look like it came that way, and it wasn't. So it was a piece of garbage.
I can absolutely say I've never taken part in any of that awful, despicable practice, but I know for certain that it happens quite a lot. So just because something is at an estate sale or a government seized assets auction, there's plenty of stuff in there.
I've seen fakes being sold at government seized auctions.
Absolutely.
We keep going back to this. It's the same kind of situation or story that we talk about when we address, the quality of service. It's the same thing. You need to be aware of where you're going, who's selling it, what the authenticity is. And you know what? At the end of the day, just to wrap it up, everything that I've said before is just doing your homework. It is up to you. It is your responsibility as a buyer to be informed. If you are not an informed buyer, and I understand that you should be able to place your trust in professionals, but professionals, and this is basically across the board, this is in any and all businesses, professionals are very far and few between.
That is absolutely true. In fact, if I can give a piece of advice to some watchmaking professionals, professional watch service people, because I didn't mean to imply that only the factories can service your watch correctly, and that's the only way to buy a pre-owned watch. And so, to those few of you who actually are real watchmakers, if you do decide to service a watch that has aftermarket parts on it and you choose to do so knowing that it is technically a counterfeit. Doesn't mean you should deny service, but absolutely protect yourself and put it on the paperwork.
Right.
Indicate so that also a future buyer, so that that person who would ever sell the watch cannot go and place the blame on you for having serviced, especially if you have an authorized parts account, if you have any relationship with these brands, you do not want to become the culprit or bear any responsibility for somebody using deceptive practices to sell one of these counterfeit parts. You don't want
to bite the hand that feeds you, right?
That's right.
Right. Just one other thing that I wanted to share about professionals. There's a very big difference between professionals and experts. I keep forgetting where I got this from, but it was a really great sales training. And they basically said, would you trust an expert? And he said, no, because it's an X of something, X of whatever. Experts are usually self-proclaimed. I'm an expert at this. A professional doesn't have to say that. A professional is going to give you a clear and concise answer, and they really don't care about hurting your feelings, and they also really don't care about trying to throw something your way because their reputation is worth more than making a quick sale. So an expert, be careful. Go for professionals. Go for someone that is going to be able to back up what they're saying. And I know those are few and far between, but they are out there. And the way that you get to those people is not making a brash decision to make a purchase and by doing your research.
Absolutely.
Here, here. Yeah, I agree with you, Mike. Thanks for that bit of advice. It's really hard for people to find good professionals, but they are out there.
This episode of On Time was recorded and engineered by Michael Senderovich with supervision by Tim Hatayama.
Team OTP is Kenshu Production and Savada and Dune on social media.
Our theme song was composed and recorded by Hubie Wang.
For the entire OTP team, this is Mike.
And this is Chase. Thank you for listening to On Time.